address the Assembly. Order, please. Ladies and gentlemen, order. Order, please.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight. I decided to come here to speak for my people, to speak for my country, to speak for the truth. And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again. Yet we face savage enemies who seek our annihilation, and we must defend ourselves against these savage murderers. Our enemies seek not only to destroy us, they seek to destroy our common civilization and return all of us to a dark age of tyranny and terror. When I spoke here last year, I said we faced the same timeless choice that Moses put before the people of Israel thousands of years ago. As we were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses told us that our actions will determine whether we bequeath to future generations a blessing or a curse. And that is the choice we face today. The curse of Iran's unremitting aggression, or the blessing of a historic reconciliation between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed that speech, the blessing I spoke of came into sharper focus. A normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel seemed closer than ever. But then came the curse of October 7th. Thousands of Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists from Gaza burst into Israel in pickup trucks, on motorcycles, and they committed unimaginable atrocities. They savagely murdered 1,200 people. They raped and mutilated women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. They burnt entire families alive, babies, children, parents, grandparents, in scenes reminiscent of the Nazi Holocaust. Hamas kidnapped 251 people from dozens of different countries, dragging them into the dungeons of Gaza. Israel has brought home 154 of these hostages, including 117 who returned alive. I want to assure you, we will not rest until the remaining hostages are brought home too. And some of their family members are here with us today. I ask you to stand up. With us is Eli Stevie, whose son Idan was abducted from the Nova Music Festival. That was his crime. A music festival. And these murderous monsters took him. Kobe Smirno, whose son Jonathan was murdered, and his corpse was taken into the dungeons, into the terror tunnels of Gaza. A corpse held hostage. Salim Al-Atrash, whose brother Muhammad, a brave Arab Israeli soldier, was murdered. His body too was taken to Gaza. And so was the body of Ifat Hyman's daughter in Bar, who was brutally murdered at that same music festival. With us is Sharon Sharabi, whose brother Yossi was murdered and who prays for his older brother Eli, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And with us too is Izhar Lifsich from kibbutz Nir Oz, a kibbutz that was wiped out by the terrorists. Thankfully, we achieved the release of his mother Yocheved, but his father Oded is still languishing in an underground terrorist hell of Hamas. I again promise you, we will return your loved ones home. We will not spare that effort until this holy mission is accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, the curse of October 7th began when Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza, but it didn't end there. Israel was soon forced to defend itself on 6 more war fronts organized by Iran. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked us from Lebanon. Since then, they fired over 8,000 rockets at our towns and cities, at our civilians, at our children. 2 weeks later, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched drones and missiles at Israel, the first of 250 such attacks, including one yesterday aimed at Tel Aviv. Iran's Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq have targeted Israel dozens of times over the past year as well. Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel. And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning. Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the seven-front war, the line separating the blessing and the curse could not be more clear. This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair. And if you think this dark map is only a curse for Israel, if you think that, then you should think again. Because Iran's aggression, if it's not checked, will endanger every single country in the Middle East and many, many countries in the rest of the world, because Iran seeks to impose its radicalism well beyond the Middle East. That's why it funds terror networks on 5 continents. That's why it builds ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads to threaten the entire world. For too long, the world has appeased Iran. It turns a blind eye to its internal repression. It turns a blind eye to its external aggression. Well, that appeasement must end, and that appeasement must end now. Nations of the world should support the brave people of Iran who want to rid themselves of this evil regime. Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. They should join Israel in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. In this body, in the Security Council, we're going to have a deliberation in a few months. And I call on the Security Council to snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, because we must all do everything in our power to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. For decades, I've been warning the world against Iran's nuclear program. Our actions delayed this program by perhaps a decade, but we haven't stopped it. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it. Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. For the sake of the peace and security of the entire world, we must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question before us is simple. Which of these 2 maps that I showed you will shape our future? Will it be the blessings of peace and prosperity for Israel, our Arab partners, and the rest of the world? Or will it be the curse in which Iran and its proxies spread carnage and chaos everywhere? Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. For nearly a year, the brave men and women of the IDF have been systematically crushing Hamas's terror army that once ruled Gaza. On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network. In major military operations, we destroyed nearly all of Hamas's terror battalions, 23 out of 24 battalions. Now, to complete our victory, we are focused on mopping up Hamas's remaining fighting capabilities. We are taking out senior terrorist commanders and destroying remaining terrorist infrastructure. But all the while, and I'll say this one more time, we remain focused on our sacred mission, bringing our hostages home, and we will not stop until that mission is complete. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even with Hamas's greatly diminished military capability, the terrorists still exercise some governing power in Gaza by stealing the food that we enable aid agencies to bring into Gaza. Hamas steals the food, and then they hike the prices. They feed their bellies, and then they fill their coffers with money that they extort from their own people. They sell the stolen food at exorbitant prices. And that's how they stay in power. Well, this too has to end, and we're working to bring it to an end. And the reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go. Just imagine, for those who say, well, Hamas has to stay, it has to be part of a post-war Gaza. Imagine, in a post-war situation in World War II, imagine allowing the defeated Nazis in 1945 to rebuild Germany. It's inconceivable. It's ridiculous. It didn't happen then. It's not going to happen now. This is why Israel will reject any rule for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. We don't seek to resettle Gaza. What we seek is a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Only then can we ensure that this round of fighting will be the last round of fighting. We are ready to work with regional and other partners to support a local civilian administration in Gaza committed to peaceful coexistence. As for the hostages, I have a message for the Hamas captors. Let them go. Let them go. All of them. Those alive today must be returned alive, and the remains of those whom you brutally killed must be returned to their families. Those families here with us today, and others in Israel, deserve to have a resting place for their loved ones, a place where they can grieve and remember them. This war, ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. Israel must also defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the quintessential terror organization in the world today. It has tentacles that span in all continents. It has murdered more Americans and more Frenchmen than any group except bin Laden. It's murdered the citizens of many countries represented in this room. And it has attacked Israel viciously over the last 20 years, in the last year, completely unprovoked. A day after the Hamas massacre, on October 7th, Hezbollah began attacks against Israel, which forced more than 60,000 Israelis on our northern border to leave their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. Hezbollah turned vibrant towns in the north of Israel into ghost towns. So I want you to think about this in equivalent American terms. Just imagine if terrorists turned El Paso and San Diego into ghost towns. Then ask yourself, how long would the American government tolerate that? A day? A week? A month? I doubt they tolerate it even for a single day. Yet Israel has been tolerating this intolerable situation for nearly a year. Well, I've come here today to say, enough is enough. We won't rest until our citizens can return safely to their homes. We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border, able to perpetrate another October 7th-style massacre. For 18 years, Hezbollah brazenly refused to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which requires it to move its forces away from our borders. Instead, Hezbollah moved right up to our border. They secretly dug terror tunnels to infiltrate our communities and indiscriminately fired thousands of rockets into our towns and villages. They fire these rockets and missiles not from military sites, not from that. They do that too. But they fire those rockets and missiles after they place them in schools, in hospitals, in apartment buildings, and in the private homes of the citizens of Lebanon. They endanger their own people. They put a missile in every kitchen, a rocket in every garage. I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the death trap that Hezbollah has put you in. Don't let Nasrallah drag Lebanon into the abyss. We're not at war with you. We're at war with Hezbollah, which has hijacked your country and threatens to destroy ours. As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing. Just this week, the IDF destroyed large percentages of Hezbollah's rockets, which had built with Iran's funding for 3 decades. We took out senior military commanders who not only shed Israeli blood, but American and French blood as well. And then we took out their replacements, and then the replacements of their replacements. And we'll continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are met. Ladies and gentlemen, we're committed to removing the curse of terrorism that threatens all civilized societies. But to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, we must continue the path we paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And having seen the blessings that we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, the millions of Israelis who've already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula, over the skies of Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace, I say to you, what blessings such a peace with Saudi Arabia would bring. It would be a boon to the security and economy of our two countries. It would boost trade and tourism across the region. It would help transform the Middle East into a global juggernaut. Our two countries could cooperate on energy, water, agriculture, artificial intelligence, and many, many other fields. Such a peace, I'm sure, would be a true pivot of history. It would usher in a historic reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel, between Islam and Judaism, between Mecca and Jerusalem. While Israel is committed to achieving such a peace, Iran and its terror proxies are committed to scuttling it. That's why one of the best ways to foil Iran's nefarious designs is to achieve the peace. Such a peace would be the foundation for an even broader Abrahamic alliance. And that alliance would include the United States, Israel's current Arab peace partners, Saudi Arabia, and others who choose the blessing of peace. It would advance security and prosperity across the Middle East and bring enormous benefits to the rest of the world. With American support and leadership, I believe this vision can materialize, and much sooner than people think. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to make it happen. This is an opportunity that we and the world should not let go by. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has made its choice. We seek to move forward to a bright age of prosperity and peace. Iran and its proxies have also made their choice. They want to move back to a dark age of terror and war. And now I have a question. And I pose that question to you. What choice will you make? Will your nation stand with Israel? Will you stand with democracy and peace? Or will you stand with Iran, a brutal dictatorship that subjugates its own people, exports terrorism across the globe? In this battle between good and evil, there must be no equivocation. When you stand with Israel, you stand for your own values and your own interests. Yes, we're defending ourselves, but we're also defending you against a common enemy that through violence and terror seeks to destroy our way of life. So there should be no confusion about this. But unfortunately, there is a lot of it in many countries and in this very hall, as I've just heard. Good is portrayed as evil, and evil is portrayed as good. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of genocide, when we defend ourselves against enemies who try to commit genocide against us. We see this too when Israel is absurdly accused by the ICC prosecutor of deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza. What an absurdity. We helped bring in 700,000 tons of food into Gaza. That's more than 3,000 calories a day for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of deliberately targeting civilians. We don't want to see a single person, a single innocent person die. That's always a tragedy. And that's why we do so much to minimize civilian casualties, even as our enemies use civilians as human shields. And no army has done what Israel is doing to minimize civilian casualties. We drop flyers, we send text messages, we make phone calls by the millions to ensure that Palestinian civilians get out of harm's way. We spare no effort in this noble pursuit. We see yet another profound moral confusion when self-described progressives march against the democracy of Israel. Don't they realize they support the Iranian-backed goons in Tehran and in Gaza? The goons who gun down protesters, murder women for not covering their hair, and hang gays in public squares, some progressives. According to the US Director of National Intelligence, Iran funds and fuels many of the protesters against Israel. Who knows, maybe some of the protesters, or even many of the protesters outside this building now. Ladies and gentlemen, King Solomon, who reigned in our eternal capital, Jerusalem, 3,000 years ago, proclaimed something that is familiar to all of you. He said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Well, in an age of space travel, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence, some would argue that's a debatable statement. But one thing is undeniable. There is definitely nothing new at the United Nations. Take it from me. I first spoke from this podium as Israel's ambassador to the UN in 1984. That's exactly 40 years ago. And in my maiden speech here, I think it's the same podium, by the way. In my maiden speech here, I spoke against a proposal to expel Israel from this body. 4 decades later, I find myself defending Israel against that same preposterous proposal. And who's leading the charge this time? Not Hamas, but Abbas, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. This is the man who claims he wants peace with Israel. Yet he still refuses to condemn the horrific massacre of October 7th. He's still paying hundreds of millions to terrorists who murder Israelis and Americans. It's called pay for slay. The more you murder, the more you get paid. And he still wages unremitting diplomatic warfare against Israel's right to exist and against Israel's right to defend itself. And by the way, they amount to the same thing. Because if you can't defend yourself, you can't exist. Not in our neighborhood, certainly, and maybe not in yours. Standing in this podium 40 years ago, I told the sponsors of that outrageous resolution to expel Israel, gentlemen, check your fanaticism at the door. Today, I tell President Abbas and all of you who would shamefully support that resolution, check your fanaticism at the door. The singling out of the one and only Jewish state continues to be a moral stain on the United Nations. It has made this once respected institution contemptible in the eyes of decent people everywhere. But for the Palestinians, this UN House of Darkness is home court. They know that in this swamp of anti-Semitic bile, there's an automatic majority willing to demonize the Jewish state on anything. In this anti-Israel flat earth society, any false charge, any outlandish allegation can muster a majority. In the last decade, there have been more resolutions passed against Israel in this hall at the UN General Assembly than against the entire world combined. Actually, more than twice as many. Since 2014, this body condemned Israel 174 times. It condemned all the other countries in the world 73 times. That's more than 100 extra condemnations for the Jewish state. What hypocrisy, what a double standard, what a joke. So the UN's hostility So all the speeches you heard today, all the hostility directed at Israel this year, it's not about Gaza. It's about Israel. It's always been about Israel's very existence. And I say to you, until Israel, until the Jewish state is treated like other nations, until this anti-Semitic swamp is drained, the UN will be viewed by fair-minded people everywhere as nothing more than a contemptuous farce. Now, given the anti-Semitism at the UN, it should surprise no one that the prosecutor at the ICC, one of the UN's affiliated organs, is considering issuing arrest warrants against me and Israel's defense minister, the democratically elected leaders of the democratic state of Israel. The ICC prosecutors rushed to judgment. His refusal to treat Israel with its independent courts the way other democracies are treated is hard to explain by anything other than pure anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, the real war criminals are not in Israel. They're in Iran. They're in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. Those of you who stand with these war criminals, those of you who stand with evil against good, with a curse against the blessing, those of you who do so should be ashamed of yourselves. But I have a message for you. Israel will win this battle. We'll win this battle because we don't have a choice. After generations in which our people were slaughtered, remorselessly butchered, and no one raised a finger in our defense, we now have a state. We now have a brave army, an army of incomparable courage, and we are defending ourselves. As the book of Samuel says in the Bible, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternity of Israel will not falter. In the Jewish people's epic journey from antiquity, in our odyssey through the tempest and upheavals of modern times, that ancient promise has always been kept, and it will hold true for all time. To borrow a great poet's phrase, Israel will not go gently into that good night. We will never need to rage against the dying of the light, because the torch of Israel will forever shine bright. To the people of Israel and to the soldiers of Israel, I say, be strong and of good courage. חזקו ואמצו ואל תיראו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיך הוא ההולך עמך, לא ירפך ולא יעזבך. עם ישראל חי, the people of Israel live, now, tomorrow, forever. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Mr. President, in your absence, I congratulate you on your assumption of this chairmanship of the General Assembly. We can wait.
And invite him to address the Assembly.
As I said, Mr. President, we need a reset.
Order, please.
And we need to reset. Those of us
Ladies
here
and
today
gentlemen,
representing our
order.
brothers and our sisters the world over have endured 4 years of polycrises. As
Order,
the children of
please.
Mother Earth, we continue to wrestle with the climate crisis. As a human family, we grapple with the legacy of the pandemic. As a digitally connected people, we are now, regrettably, confronted by multiple theaters of war and scenes of horror and famine flowing from that war.
Mr. President,
Armed conflict instead of
ladies and
pursued
gentlemen,
development. Citizens of every country
I didn't
as
intend
well,
to come here this year.
struggling to contain the rising cost of
My
living
country is at war,
and the implications for them and
fighting
their
for its
families
life.
on a day-to-day basis.
But
And Mr.
after I
Speaker,
heard
Mr. President,
the lies and
we are all now
slanders
threatened by the
leveled at
second
my country
but silent
by
pandemic
many of the
of
speakers at this
antimicrobial
podium,
resistance together with a
I
growing
decided to come
incidence
here
of death and disability from
and
chronic
set the record straight.
non-communicable diseases. We cannot afford the distraction of war. If ever there was a time
I decided to
pause
come here
and to reset,
to
it is
speak for
now.
my people,
Collectively,
to speak for my country, to speak for
collectively
the
as an
truth.
international community, and individually as leaders in each of our countries.
And here's the truth.
We must now deliver new
Israel
opportunities
seeks
and
peace.
solutions to these crises
Israel
which dampen
yearns for
economic
peace.
growth,
Israel
which restrict
has
the
made
ambitions
peace
of our
and will
people
make
numb our
peace
sense of
again.
the beauty and goodness that the world ought to be offering because it has it to offer.
Yet we face
The
savage
reset
enemies,
For which I'm
who
calling,
seek
and
our
indeed all of our
annihilation.
citizens are
and
demanding,
we must defend ourselves
must see an
against
end to
these
all forms
savage
of
murderers.
discrimination.
Our
That
enemies
rules
seek
and
not only to
institutions today
destroy
exist
us,
which create first and second
they
class
seek to
citizens, as we
destroy
have said
our
from this
common
podium
civilization
year after year,
and return all of us
depending on your
to a
nation
dark
of origin,
age of
militate
tyranny and
against
terror.
the trust and the credibility and the hope.
When I spoke here
And
last
it
year,
fosters a crisis of confidence
I said
in the
we
existing
face
international
the same
order,
timeless choice
which must become
that
inclusive
Moses
and
put
responsive
before
for
the
all.
people of Israel
more than
thousands
any
of
other
years ago,
complaint from this podium,
as we were
has
about to
been
enter the
the
promised land,
disparity in treatment
Moses
and the
told us
inability to be able
that our
to have
actions will determine
fair and
whether we
transparent
bequeath to
treatment for
future
all
generations
that
a
would
blessing
lead to the trust
or a
necessary
curse.
for us to solve
that
the
is the
problems
choice
of our
we
times
face
that
today.
are truly beyond
The curse of
man-made
Iran's
causes.
unremitting aggression, or the
Neo-colonial
blessing
structures
of a historic
that perpetuate and
reconciliation
reflect
between
an
Arab and
old
Jew.
world order characterized
days
by
that followed that
racism and
speech,
classism and
The blessing I
misogyny,
spoke of
while
came into
ignoring
sharper
the
focus.
legitimate aspirations
A
of
normalization
billions
deal
will
between
not
Saudi
help to
Arabia
foster the
and
hope or
Israel
trust
seemed
that is
closer than
necessary
ever.
to meet these polycrises.
But then
We must
came
ensure that
the
the global
curse of
institutions
October
give
7th.
developing countries, especially small,
Thousands of
vulnerable states like
Iranian-backed
my own,
Hamas terrorists
or
from
vulnerable
Gaza
middle-income countries,
burst into Israel
seats at
in
the
pickup
table of
trucks, on
decision-making
motorcycles,
where we can be seen,
and they committed
heard,
unimaginable
become active
atrocities.
agents in our own
They
cause and
savagely
lead our
murdered
own
1,200
development
people.
paradigms.
They raped and
My
mutilated
friends,
women.
we are reminded that
They beheaded
2024
men. They
is the
burned
final
babies
year
alive.
of the United
They
Nations
burned entire
decade for the
families
people of
alive.
African
Babies,
descent.
children, parents, grandparents.
Much has been
in scenes
achieved,
reminiscent
but the
of
recognition,
the Nazi
the
Holocaust.
justice, and the development for people of
Hamas
African
kidnapped
descent
251 people
that was promised
from
by
dozens
this
of different
decade
countries,
has,
dragging
to say
them
the
into the
least,
dungeons of
not
Gaza.
yet been fully realized.
Israel has brought
And
home
it is for this
154 of these
reason that the
hostages,
Caribbean community
including
joins the growing
117
chorus,
who returned alive.
and my own country in particular, for the immediate
want to assure you,
proclamation of a second decade
We will not rest
to complete
until
the
the
unfinished
remaining
work and
hostages
address
are brought
the
home
matter
too.
of
And
reparations
some of their family
for
members
slavery and
are here with us
colonialism.
today. I ask you to stand up.
I start here because this is a necessary
With us,
but complex
with us is Eli
conversation.
Stevie,
And the Caribbean community is
Husani Dan
resolute
was
that it must
abducted from the
happen.
Nova Music
Its
Festival.
resolution
That was
lies,
his
and I
crime.
want to
A
be
music
very
festival.
clear. Its resolution lies
And
in
these
a
murderous monsters
multi-generational
took him.
approach. In the same way that the
Bobby
20
Smirno,
million pound
His
sterling
son
debt
Jonathan was murdered,
that was
and his
incurred by
corpse,
the
his
British
corpse was
government
taken into the
only
dungeons,
was
into the
repaid
terror tunnels of
in
Gaza.
this
A corpse
21st
held
century,
hostage.
almost 200 years later.
Salim al-Atrash,
So that the notion of
brother Muhammad,
unaffordability
a
becomes
brave
a
Arab Israeli
non-issue
soldier, was murdered.
once we recognize that
His
the
body too
solution
was
to
taken to Gaza.
reparations must be multi-generational
And so was the body
and
of Ifat
grounded
Hyman's
in
daughter in
development.
Bar, who was brutally
President,
murdered at that same
necessity,
music festival.
The reset must also be
With us is
characterized by
Sharon
institutional
Sharabi,
reform,
Whose brother Yossi
which
was
has to
murdered,
start in the United
and who
Nations
prays
councils.
for his older brother Eli.
These
who is
councils
still held
suggest that
hostage
some are full
in Gaza.
members, and others
with
are
us too
only part members,
is
and
Izhar
some may be
Lifshitz
part-time members,
from
and some may
kibbutz
be
Nir Oz, a
occasional
kibbutz
members.
that was wiped
All
out
of this has
by
no
the
place in the
terrorists.
21st century.
Thankfully,
And
we
the anger
achieved
and the
the release
mistrust
of
of
his
our
mother
citizens
Yocheved,
and institutions,
but his father
in
Oded
leaders,
is still
in
languishing
multilateralism, and in
in
the
an
processes
underground
which
terrorist
exclude,
hell of
while
Hamas.
yielding much talk
I
and
again
little
promise
action,
you,
is very
we
real.
will return your
And
loved
nowhere
ones
is
home. We
reform
will
and
not spare
consequently
that
trust
effort
and hope
until this holy mission
more
is accomplished.
important to the well-being of billions of people today than in relation to the global financial architecture. Restricted
Ladies
access
and
to
gentlemen,
capital, its disproportionately
the curse of
high
October
costs,
7th
barring us
began
from
when
doing
Hamas
that which we
invaded
must.
Israel from Gaza,
Its inadequate scale
but it didn't end there.
and the overwhelming
Israel was
burden
soon
of
forced
debt
to defend
often
itself
imposed on
on
us
6 more
by
war
circumstances
fronts
beyond our
organized by
control.
Iran.
These
On
are all
October
now
8th,
combining to force
Hezbollah attacked us
governments
from Lebanon.
in the world's poorest
Since then, they
countries
fired over
and
8,000
frankly,
rockets
across many
at our towns
vulnerable
and
middle-income
cities,
countries
at our
to
civilians,
devote more
at our children.
resources to debt service
2
than
weeks
to
later,
health and
the
education,
Iran-backed Houthis
and in some
in Yemen
instances even
launched drones
infrastructure.
and missiles at Israel. The
far
first
too
of
many members of the
250
human
such
family,
attacks, including one yesterday
cold
aimed at Tel
ground
Aviv.
is our bed.
Iran's Shiite militias
rock
in Syria and
is
Iraq
our pillow.
have targeted Israel dozens
many
of
go to
times
bed
over the past year as well.
with their bellies hungry.
Fueled by Iran, Palestinian
And too many
terrorists in Judea and
not
Samaria
even have a bed.
perpetrated scores of attacks
Our
there
reset must
and
therefore
throughout
collectively
Israel.
build a common agenda
And
that
last
reflects
April,
and reinforces our shared
first time
humanity.
ever,
It is
Iran
that shared
directly
humanity
attacked
that
Israel
binds us
from its
together.
own territory,
Mr.
firing
President,
300
you know
drones,
better than
cruise
most.
missiles,
Our
and
African
ballistic
brothers and
missiles at us.
sisters got it right with the principle of Ubuntu.
I have a message
and
for
I've
the tyrants
used
of
this
Tehran.
principle, this
If you
General
strike
Assembly,
us,
to remind
we will
us
strike you.
that its simplicity
There is no place
is what we should aspire to. I am because you are. I am because we are. My
There is no
well-being
place in Iran
is tied to yours.
that the
And our
long arm
collective
of Israel
well-being
cannot
is
reach.
connected to
And
Mother
that's true
Earth.
of the entire
This
Middle East.
best voices the approach
Far from
needed
being lambs
to
led to
give
the slaughter,
expression to the
Israel's
reset
soldiers have fought
that is
back with
absolutely
incredible
necessary.
courage and with
And we
heroic
acknowledge
sacrifice.
that there are
And
glimpses
I
of
have
hope.
another message for
We
this
have, for
assembly
example,
and for the world
on
outside
Monday,
this hall.
agreed to a
We
pact for the
are
future.
winning.
But we still have war. We have agreed on a global digital compact. But we still have raging pandemics in the slow motion silent pandemic.
Ladies and gentlemen, as
All
Israel
of this
defends
rests,
itself
my friends,
against Iran
on
in
the common
7th Front
agenda that
War,
the Secretary General has
the
set
line
out for us
separating the
before.
blessing and the curse
Yesterday, we
could not
agreed in
be
a
more
high-level
clear.
meeting on a political declaration on
This is the map
antimicrobial resistance.
I
A lot of
presented
fancy
here last year.
words. But this
It's
is
a map
where
of a blessing.
the rubber hits the road.
It shows Israel,
Because all of us in this
Israel
room
and
know
its Arab
people
partners
who have
forming
died
a
from
land bridge
infections
connecting
and for
Asia
whom the antibiotics simply are
Europe
no longer effective.
between
So that
the
within
Indian
48
Ocean and the
hours,
Mediterranean
a
Sea.
person's life is snuffed out,
Across
almost
this
as if they
bridge,
were at war.
we will lay
My
rail
friends,
lines,
following on the
energy
intervention of the
pipelines,
Bridgetown Initiative
fiber optic cables,
and the Paris
and
Pact
this will
for People
serve the
and Planet,
betterment of 2
the
billion
efforts
people.
of many,
Now look at
across
this
the board,
second map.
we acknowledge that there is some hope.
It's a
And it
map.
is evident in the beginnings of the reform
Look at the second
that
map.
we are
It's
seeing.
a map of a curse.
Little by little,
It's a
but
map
nevertheless, they have
of
started.
an arc of terror
These
that
are
Iran
all
has
important
created and
steps,
imposed from the Indian
but we
Ocean to the
cannot take our
Mediterranean.
eyes off the prize.
Iran's malignant
Barbados
arc
has called for
has
fundamental
shut down
reset,
international waterways.
includes
It
attitudes
cuts
and
off trade.
behavior
It
as
destroys
much as
millions,
actions or reforms.
destroys nations from within,
Heads of
and
government
inflicts misery
are
on
in
millions.
agree that we must trigger
On the one
national
hand-
development agendas of transformation with both
On
speed
the one hand,
and scale. We have a
a
date
bright
with
blessing,
destiny
a future of
against
hope.
1.5 degrees.
On the other hand, a
we
dark
know
future of despair.
that is what is needed
And if
to
you
survive.
think this dark map
and the implications
is only a
for
curse for
people,
Israel,
even as
if
we
you
speak,
think that,
can be dire.
then you should think again.
But if there is a failure to act
Because
with
Iran's
clarity of
aggression,
purpose, and if
if
the
it's not
political
checked,
will retards
will endanger
progress
every single
on the
country in
front
the
of the
Middle East
much-needed reform within
and
the
many,
international
many
financial
countries in the rest of the
institutions,
world.
purely
Because
because
Iran
heads
seeks
of
to
government
impose
do
its
not speak to
radicalism
ministers of
well
finance
beyond the
when they
Middle
reach
East.
Washington, D.C.
That's why it funds
Or
terror
their board
networks on
directors.
5 continents.
If there
That's
is a
why
need
it builds ballistic missiles for
that
nuclear warheads to
to be
threaten
dealt with,
the entire
then,
world.
my friends, there
too
must
long,
be
The world has
a
appeased
commitment
Iran.
to be equal
It turns
to
a
the current
blind eye to
challenges
its
of member
internal
states
repression.
if we are
It
not
turns a
to
blind eye to its
perpetuate
external
the
aggression.
discriminatory
Well,
practices
that appeasement
that
must
result in
end.
undermining the
And that
transformational
appeasement must
opportunities
end
that we
now.
need. Depriving vulnerable countries from being able to access concessional income that is long enough to build the resilience to save lives and
Nations
to protect
of the world
livelihoods is unjust.
Should support the brave people
And that
of
is
Iran
why we must
who want
remain
to rid
focused.
themselves of this
That is
evil
why, my
regime.
friends, we launched
Responsible
yesterday
governments
the third
should not only
iteration of the
support
Bridgetown
Israel
Initiative,
in rolling back Iran's
which identifies
aggression.
3
They
key
should
principles,
join Israel.
very simply.
They should
One,
join Israel in
we must
stopping
change the rules
Iran's
of the
nuclear
international
weapons
financial
program.
system and reform its governance and instruments. 2, we must
In this
shock
body, in the
vulnerable
Security
economies by dealing
We're
with
going to have a
debt and
deliberation
liquidity
in a few months.
in a comprehensive,
call
development-focused
on the
manner.
Security Council
And if we need to give
to snap
countries a
back
shot
UN
of
Security
liquidity like
Council
we give them a
sanctions
shot
against
of
Iran,
adrenaline
because we
to
must
avoid
all
them
do
falling off the
everything
cliff
in
of
our
death,
power
then we must do so.
to ensure that
And
Iran
thirdly,
never
we must
gets
augment
nuclear
financing by
weapons.
boosting country capacity to invest in resilience by several means, including
For decades,
what has been announced already,
I've been warning
the
the world
rechanneling of
against
special
Iran's
drawing
nuclear
rights
program.
through our multilateral development
Our actions
partners.
delayed
but
this
that
program
will only be truly
by
effective
perhaps a
if there
decade.
is another issuance of
But we haven't
SDRs
stopped it.
in the near
we've
future.
delayed it.
Indeed,
but we haven't stopped
we
it.
must also
Iran now seeks to
address
weaponize
the
its nuclear
challenge,
program
and this
for
I
the
believe
sake
to be the
of
fundamental
the peace
mission
and
of this
security
generation,
of all your
of how
countries.
we are going to secure
For the sake of the
global
peace and
public
security of
commons
the entire
to
world,
be able to maintain
we must
our
not
safety
let
and
that
stability
happen.
as a
And I
global
assure you,
community.
Israel
We're
will
gonna have
do
to discuss
everything in its
how
power
we can
to
secure
make sure it
and of
doesn't
course,
happen.
how we must finance it. And that is not only the climate crisis or the loss of biodiversity.
So,
that
ladies
we
and
speak
gentlemen,
about, but the other many global
the question
challenges
before us
that can truly
is simple.
destabilize countries and regions.
Which of these
Mr.
two
President,
maps that
these
I showed you
considerations are
will
of
shape our
fundamental
future.
importance to the sustainable
Will it be the blessings
existence
of peace and
of our
prosperity for
generations,
Israel,
future
our
generations.
Arab partners, and the rest
The
of the
SIDS
world?
agenda
Or will
is
it
another
be the
story
curse in which
of
Iran and its
promises
proxies
made, but
spread
not kept.
carnage and chaos
30
everywhere?
years ago, the international community gathered in my own
Israel
country to
has
take
already
action
made
for the
its
first
choice.
time on
We've
the unique
decided to advance
challenges
the
faced by
blessing.
small island developing states.
We're building a partnership
We
for
birthed
peace
in
with
my
our
home
Arab
country
neighbors
the
while fighting
first
the
ever
forces of
global
terror
agenda
that threaten that
for
peace.
small island developing states,
nearly
which
a
became
year,
known as the
The
Barbados
brave
Program
men
of
and women
Action.
of the IDF
I
have been
thank Mauritius
systematically crushing
for its strategy
Hamas's
of
terror
implementation,
army that once ruled
Samoa
Gaza.
for its
On
pathway.
October 7th,
They were carriers of
the
the
day
baton of a
of
development
that invasion
agenda
into
for
Israel,
small island developing
that
states
terror army
in the
numbered
intervening
nearly
years.
40,000
In the face of
terrorists.
multiple global
It was armed
crises
with
from
more than
health to climate to
15,000
finance.
rockets.
The
It had
vulnerabilities, yes, of our
350
countries as small
miles of
states
terror
have become
tunnels,
more pronounced.
an underground
In May
network
of this year,
bigger than the New
we
York
gathered
subway
in Antigua
system,
and Barbuda
which
for
they
the
used
fourth
to wreak
international
havoc
conference
above
on small
and below
island
ground.
developing states.
A
And
year
I call
later,
on the international
the
community
IDF
and
has
the
killed or
multilateral
captured
system
more than
to
half
let
of
us
these
work
terrorists,
together to ensure
destroyed
that
over
the promise
90%
created
of their
in
rocket
Bridgetown
arsenal
in
and eliminated
1994
the key segments
is delivered
of their terror
and
tunnel
realized
network.
through the
In major
Antigua
military
and Barbuda
operations.
agenda for SIDS 2024, otherwise known as
In
ABBAS.
major military operations,
Let
we
me use
destroyed
this
nearly half
opportunity
of
as
Hamas's,
well
nearly
inform
all
you
of Hamas's
that 2
terror
days
battalions,
ago we took over the
23 out of
presidency of the
24
Climate
battalions.
Vulnerable Forum.
Now to
The
complete our
V20
victory,
countries of the
we
world
are
from
focused
Ghana,
on
whose
mopping up
president I would like to
Hamas's
thank for the
remaining
excellent
fighting
stewardship
capabilities.
of the group over
We
the
are
past
taking out
2
senior
years,
terrorist
and
commanders
indeed for the
and
strengthening
destroying
of its
remaining
institutional
terrorist
capacity.
infrastructure.
The priorities
But all
of
the
our
while-
term as chair
all
of
the
the
while,
V20
and I'll say
countries
this one more time,
will be the multiple
we remain
dimensions of
focused
climate crisis,
on our sacred mission,
dealing with them,
bringing
the
our
impact of the
hostages
climate
home,
crisis on human
and we will
health,
not stop
and of
until
course
that
the
mission
issue of debt and
is
climate,
complete.
because if we don't solve that, we cannot take the appropriate
Now, ladies and
actions
gentlemen,
to
even
deal
with
the
Hamas's
climate.
greatly
I
diminished
invite all
military
United Nations
capability,
members who are
the
not
terrorists
yet
still exercise
members of the
some governing
V20 but
power in
who are
Gaza
climate vulnerable
by stealing the
to join
food
this group,
that we
because
enable
it is only
aid
through
that we enable
amplification
aid
of our
agencies
voices
to bring into
and
Gaza.
consistency
Hamas
of
steals
our
the food,
message and
then
solidarity
they hike the prices.
that we will continue to see
feed
the
their
pace
bellies,
and scale of reforms
and then they fill their
that
coffers
we need
with money
to be able
that
to
they
save our
extort from their
people's
own
lives.
people.
I commend to you
They
the
sell the
declaration
stolen
of the
food
leaders of the Climate Vulnerable
at
Forum
exorbitant prices.
that was adopted this week.
And that's
on
how they
Wednesday.
stay in power. Well, this too
Mr. President,
has to end, and we're working
all
to
else,
bring it to an end.
We need a global reset on peace. There needs to be
And the reason
global
is simple.
peace.
Because if Hamas stays
Those
in
of us who
power,
are old
it
enough
will regroup,
would have
rearm,
recognized that
and attack
there are
Israel again
peaks
and again and
valleys
again, as it
as
is
it
vowed to
relates
do.
to this issue of
So
conflict.
Hamas has got to go.
There are few areas where the world is more in need of the United Nations acting as the United Nations
imagine,
to secure the
For those who
objectives
say,
of the
well,
Charter
Hamas has to stay, it has to be
than in the
part
area of the
of
peace
a post-war
and
Gaza.
security.
Imagine
The
the
silence
post-war
that has
situation
engulfed
in
Sudan
World War II. Imagine allowing
unacceptable
the defeated Nazis
and
in
may well be
1945 to
rooted in the
rebuild
racism
Germany.
that the world
It's
still carries
inconceivable.
as a badge
It's
of
ridiculous.
honor
It didn't
from
happen
the
then.
victories
It's not going to
of
happen
the
now.
last great war of World War II. The actions in Myanmar cannot continue.
This is why Israel will reject
Ukraine
any rule for
has
Hamas
sucked more
in a
oxygen
post-war
out of
Gaza.
the global community
We don't seek to resettle
and the
Gaza.
global financial
What we seek
system
is a
than any of us
demilitarized and
can
de-radicalized Gaza.
accept
Only then,
at the very time
only then,
when the
can
world
we ensure
needs to
that
be
this
applying
round
its
of fighting
resources and efforts
will be the
to
last
fight in
round
the
of
greatest
fighting.
crisis known to
We are ready to
mankind.
work with regional and other partners
And the spread
to
of the
support a
war
local civilian administration
from
in
Gaza
Gaza committed to peaceful
to
coexistence.
the consequences in the West
As for
Bank,
the hostages,
to now
I
clearly
have a message
what is
for
happening
the
in
Hamas
Lebanon as we
captors.
speak.
Let
with
them
Israel.
go.
All of these
Let
are
them
but the
go.
tip of an iceberg
All
of
of them.
death, violence,
Those alive
and
today
instability,
must be returned
and
alive.
robs the global
And the
community
remains of those whom
oxygen
you brutally
and
killed
resources
must be
at
returned
the
to their
very time
families.
when we need it
Those
most
families here
in a
with us
strategic
today
way.
and others in Israel
We all
deserve
know,
to have a
as
resting
students
place
of
for their
history,
loved ones,
that even
a
the
place
longest war
where they
in
can
history
grieve
came to an end.
and remember them.
These wars,
This war,
yes, they too will come to an end. But the
ladies and
question is
gentlemen,
when
This
and at
war
what
can
cost,
come to an end
and
now.
without much loss of life.
All that has to
With how
happen
many children
is for
not
Hamas
being
to
able to be
surrender,
either given the chance
lay down
to
its
live,
arms,
or
and
will now
release all
live
the hostages.
with memories
But
of
if they
war
don't,
that will affect their every action
But if
for
they
the
don't,
next 60, 70,
we will
80
fight
years of
until
their
we
lives.
achieve victory,
Innocent
total
people
victory.
are
There
paying
is
the
no
price
substitute for it.
with the one thing that is theirs to give, and they don't give it willingly.
Israel must also
is their
defeat
life.
Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Unless we address the
Hezbollah
root causes
Is the quintessential
wars,
terror
one
organization
by
in the
one.
world today.
and the manners in which they are
It
being
has,
sustained and financed,
Tentacles
we will
that
not
span
never
in all continents.
know anything
It
else
has
other
murdered
than
more
war
Americans
and rumors of war
and
in
more
these
Frenchmen
theaters.
than
The
any
transmittal
group
of these
except Bin
scenes of
Laden.
horror in
It's
real
murdered
time
the
into
citizens
people's bedrooms,
of many countries
into people's
represented
living
in this room.
rooms, will trigger
And it
two
has attacked
extreme
Israel
reactions,
viciously over the last
neither
20 years.
of which
in
are
the last year.
acceptable to
Completely
us
unprovoked.
in the third decade
A day
of
after
the 21st
Hamas
century.
massacre, on
We will
October
either get
7th,
the desensitizing
Hezbollah
of
began
ordinary
attacks
people
against Israel,
to the loss
which
of
forced
lives,
more than 60,000
especially
Israelis
those of
on our
innocent
northern
children
border
and women on the
to
one
leave their
hand,
homes,
or we will get
becoming
on the other
refugees in
hand
their own land,
the anger and
Hezbollah
inclination
turned
for
vibrant
vengeance
towns in
that
the
it
north of
spawns
Israel
necessarily.
into ghost towns.
We need peace.
So I want you to think about this.
And it
in
cannot be
equivalent
too
American
difficult
terms.
for us to work
Just
for
imagine
peace.
if terrorists turned El Paso and San Diego into ghost towns. Then ask yourself,
It is
how
the
long
same
would the
Bible
American
that
government
tells us
tolerate that?
in the stories
A day?
of the
A
Old
week?
Testament,
A month?
much which has
I
guided
doubt they
many people
tolerated
across
even
this
for a
world.
single day.
But when we turn from the Old
Yet
Testament
Israel has
to the
been
New
tolerating
Testament,
this intolerable
it is
situation
Romans that says
for nearly
to
a
us,
year. Well, I've
vengeance
come here
is
today
mine,
to say,
saith the Lord.
enough is enough.
Not any country, not any human being, so that the Bible can't be used as a convenient
We won't rest
aid when
until
it
our
suits
citizens
us,
can return
and
safely
rejected
to their homes.
when it doesn't.
We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border,
In the midst
able
of
to
this
perpetrate
maelstrom,
another October 7th style massacre.
We were very clear.
For 18 years,
My country took the step this year
Hezbollah
of
brazenly
recognizing and
refused to
establishing
implement UN
diplomatic
Security
relations
Council
with the state of
Resolution
Palestine,
1701,
in spite
which
of having
requires it to
supported
move its
a
forces
two-state
away from
solution
our
since
border.
1969.
Instead, Hezbollah moved right up to our border. They secretly dug terror tunnels to infiltrate our communities and indiscriminately fired thousands of rockets
And we did
into our
this
towns and villages.
because it is clear
They
to us
fire
that the
these
state
rockets
and
and
people
missiles.
of Palestine, human beings,
Not from military
are
sides.
entitled to full recognition by integration
that.
into
They do that
and
too.
support from the
But
international
they fired
community.
those rockets.
The Charter does not say we the people,
missiles
with the
after they
exception
placed them
of
in
any
schools,
one group from
in
any
hospitals,
one part of the world.
in apartment buildings, and in the
We
private
join with
homes
others,
of the
therefore,
citizens of
in
Lebanon.
congratulating the state of
They
Palestine
endanger
in
their own
taking their
people.
seat among the United Nations
They put a
member
missile
states
in
as
every
they did
kitchen,
on the 10th of September
A
of
rocket
this
in
year.
every garage. I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the
And let
death
me be
trap
clear,
that Hezbollah has
we
put you in.
condemn the actions of Hamas
Don't let
on October
Nasrallah
7th.
drag Lebanon into the abyss.
But we equally and
We're not at
strongly
war with
deplore
you.
the humanitarian
We're at war with
catastrophe in
Hezbollah,
Gaza,
which has
is the
hijacked your
result
country and
of the
threatens to destroy
disproportionate
ours.
use of force by Israel.
As long as
There's no
Hezbollah chooses the
justification
path of
for
war,
it.
Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right
And that
to
is why
remove this threat
treaties
and
exist
return our
governing the
citizens to
rules
their
of
homes safely.
engagement for war.
And that's exactly
because we
what
as
we're
human
doing.
beings learned better and know better and committed to better. A two-state solution, no matter how elusive it
Just
may
this
appear
week,
to be now,
the IDF
is the
destroyed
only
large
answer.
percentages
And I've
of
said
Hezbollah's
already
rockets,
this week
which had
that
built
we
with
have
Iran's
known
funding for
difficult
3
battles
decades.
in mankind's
We took out
history.
senior military commanders
But when we were
who not
in it,
only
we
shed
didn't think
Israeli
we could
blood,
achieve it, but we did.
American
We
and
abolished
French
slavery.
blood as well.
We removed apartheid in
And
South
then we took out
Africa.
their replacements.
These
And then the
battles
replacements of
are
their
not
replacements.
beyond
And
our
we'll continue
creativity,
degrading
our capacity and our
Hezbollah
resilience to
until
resolve them.
all our objectives
Similarly,
are made.
we insist that the killing in Ukraine really has to stop. The people of Ukraine must be allowed to live within the internationally recognized
Ladies and
boundaries of their
gentlemen,
state in peace and freedom.
We're
from
committed
the
to
threat of
removing
use
the
or
curse of
force.
terrorism,
And as I said, it is
that
sucking too
threatens
much
all
oxygen
civilized
out of the
societies.
global financial system.
But to truly
And
realize
countries
the blessing
that
of a new
should be the
Middle East,
beneficiary of aid
we must continue
are
the
being
path we
told
paved
that
with
they
the
may
Abraham
have to
Accords
wait
4 years
in the
ago.
interest of the
Above all,
defense of
this
others
means achieving
because of
a
war.
historic peace
I say
agreement
to us
between
truly,
Israel
there
and Saudi
has to
Arabia.
be a singular commitment to build a peace. Truly.
And having seen the
Mr.
blessings
President,
that we've already brought,
my own region
with
has
the
not
Abraham
escaped
Accords,
the scourge of instability and violence.
the millions
The
of
Americas
Israelis who've
do
already
not
flown back and
constitute
forth
today a theater of
across
war.
the Arabian Peninsula,
But we are today
over the
witnessing
skies of
for
Saudi
some
Arabia,
years now
to the
an
Gulf countries,
unprecedented escalation
the
in
trade,
the number
the
and caliber of
tourism,
assault weapons,
the joint ventures,
which are finding themselves in the
peace,
hands of criminals
peace.
who are wreaking havoc
I'd
on the
say
legal
to you,
systems and our
what
societies,
blessings such a
particularly
peace
in the
with
small
Saudi
island
Arabia
developing
would
states of
bring.
the Caribbean,
It would be a
and
boon
indeed
to the
in the wider
security and
states of
economy
Central and Latin
of our
America.
two countries.
This
It would
scourge
boost
caused by
trade and
guns
tourism
manufactured
across
in the
the
United
region.
States of America
It would help
primarily
transform the Middle
also
East
requires a
into a
fundamental
global
reset.
juggernaut.
The right of
Our
persons
two
to
countries
bear
could
arms in
cooperate on
countries
energy,
not engaged
water,
in military
agriculture,
conflict
artificial
should not
intelligence,
be an opening
and many,
to accept
many
as
other
legitimate
fields.
the presence of
Such a
assault
peace,
weapons
I'm sure,
in countries.
would be a true
It is
pivot of
simply
history.
not right.
It would
There is
usher
no
in
place for
a
assault
historic
weapons in
reconciliation
our
between the
societies.
Arab world and Israel,
I
between
turn
Islam
now
and Judaism,
to the fate of the
between
people
Mecca
of Haiti,
and Jerusalem.
which continues to be
While
a major
Israel is
concern
committed to
our
achieving
people
such a
in the
peace,
Caribbean region.
Iran and its terror
The global
proxies
community
are committed
now has
to
an
scuttling it.
opportunity for
That's
an
why one of the
essential
best
reset
ways to foil
with how
Iran's
it
nefarious
addresses its
design
relationship with
is
Haiti,
to achieve the peace.
and which has been born
Such a peace
in
would be
all
the
kinds
foundation
of
for an even
semi-
broader Abrahamic
and
alliance.
partial
And that alliance would include the United
concern
States,
over the course
Israel's
of the
current
last
Arab
few
peace
decades.
partners, Saudi
We
Arabia,
continue to have
and
it as a
others
recurring
who
decimal
choose the blessing
because we
of
have
peace.
failed to solve
It
the
would advance
problems and
security
put them
and
on a
prosperity
sustainable
across
path
the
to
Middle East
development
and bring
for its
enormous
people.
benefits to the rest
What
of the
is
world.
needed is transformation
With American support and
of our
leadership,
sister nation.
I believe
And yes, we must
this
provide
vision can
first
materialize,
and foremost
and
security,
much sooner
but
than people think.
transformation must be its
And as the
handmaiden.
Prime Minister of Israel,
The government
I
and
will
people
do
of
everything
Haiti
in my
need
power
the full
to
support
make
of the
it happen.
international community.
This is an
not
opportunity
just in the short
that
term,
we and
but
the
in the
world
long term.
cannot let go by.
And yes, this starts by extending the mandate of the multinational security support
Ladies and gentlemen,
force, escalating the
Israel
work of the United
has made
Nations,
its choice.
deploying all
We
tools
seek to
of
move
bilateral,
forward
regional, and
to a
global
bright age of
cooperation,
prosperity and peace.
not excluding countries
Iran
who
and
want
its
to
proxies
participate for
have also
spurious
made their
reasons,
choice. They want to move
ensuring
back to a dark
that those
age
of us who
of
can
terror
step
and
up
war.
to the plate by significantly
now I have a
increasing
question.
the pledge funds that we do
And I
so,
pose that question
because
to
we
you.
know that it takes
What
cash
choice
to be
will
able
you
to
make?
deploy the forces and the police necessary
Will your nation
to
stand
help
with
the
Israel?
restoration.
Will you
so
stand
that
with
Haitian
democracy
mother
and peace?
or that Haitian
Or
child
will you stand
can
with
go
Iran,
about their
a
day-to-day
brutal
life
dictatorship
without fear
that subjugates
of
its own
being
people,
assaulted
exports
or
terrorism
killed
across the
or
globe?
being
this
denied
battle
the right
between
to
good and
work
evil,
because of their
there must be
simple
no
fear
equivocation.
of walking the streets.
When you stand with Israel,
The Caribbean
you
community
stand
has been
for your
working
own
hard
values
this year
and your own
to
interests.
support our largest member
Yes, we're
state.
defending ourselves.
And in the early part
we're
of the
also
first few
defending
months
you
of this year, we
against
met
a
on
common
Haiti
enemy
almost
that
3
through
to 4
violence and
times
terror
a week
seeks to destroy
to
our
guarantee
way
the
of life.
stability that we ask
So there
you
should
now
be no
to help us
confusion
secure.
about this.
We thank
But unfortunately,
the efforts of the
there is
persons group of
a
former
lot of them
CARICOM prime ministers
in many countries.
who were on the
And in
front
this very
line
hall,
of
as
helping
I've
to
just heard.
resolve this complex problem
Good is
day
portrayed
in
as
and
evil,
day out,
and
so
evil
that
is
we could
portrayed as
find
good.
a political consensus
We see
for
this
Haiti.
moral confusion
That Haiti
when
had
Israel is
at this
falsely
General
accused of
Assembly,
genocide, when
both
we
the
defend
interim
ourselves
president of the
against enemies
Transitional
who try to
Council
commit
and
genocide
Prime
against
Minister
us.
O'Neill is
We
a
see this
remarkable
too
achievement
when
given
Israel is
where
absurdly
Haiti was
accused
in February
by the
of this
ICC
year.
prosecutor
Let them
of deliberately
continue
starving
on a
Palestinians
path,
in
please,
Gaza.
of
What an absurdity.
securing
We helped
their
bring in
future. And we cannot be on
700,000
this
tons of
podium
food into
speaking about
Gaza.
Haiti
That's more
without
than
thanking
3,000 calories a
Kenya
day for
and
every
President
man,
Ruto
woman,
for their
and child in
remarkable
Gaza.
leadership.
We see
After
this
many
moral
delays
confusion
and in what
when Israel is
represents
falsely
now a
accused of
historical
deliberately targeting
precedent
civilians.
for an African country,
We don't want to see a single
have
person, a
ensured
single innocent person
that
die. That's
an
always
African
a tragedy.
country has
And that's
taken
why
the
we do
lead
so much to
in
minimize
helping to
civilian
tackle the peace
casualties,
and security
even as
challenge
our enemies
beyond
use civilians
its
as
own
human
continent.
shields.
That
And
is
no
the kind
army
of
has done
reset
what
that we
Israel is
need
doing
in the international
to
community.
minimize civilian casualties. We drop flyers, we send text messages, we
And
make
Mr.
phone calls by the
President,
millions to ensure
you
that
cannot
Palestinian
come on this
civilians
platform
get out of harm's
regrettably.
way. We spare no
Although I
effort
look forward to
in
the
this
day when I
noble
will not
pursuit.
have to say it.
We see yet
When we
another
must ask
profound moral
for
confusion
reprieve
when
for the people of Cuba.
self-described
It is
progressives
unacceptable.
march
It is
against the democracy of
unconscionable.
Israel.
and that it continues
Don't they realize
today
they support
is a
the
mark on our
Iranian-backed goons
international conscience.
in Tehran
Cuban
and in
people
Gaza?
continue
The
to
goons
face
who gun
the
down
most dire of
protesters,
economic
murder women for
circumstances,
not covering their
and
hair,
that this
and
is
hang gays in
directly
public
as a
squares,
result
some
of
progressives.
its exclusion and
According
its
to the
designation as a
U.S. Director of
state-sponsored
National
terrorism.
Intelligence,
And I have
Iran
addressed our
funds and
only
fuels
knowledge
many of the
terrorism,
protesters
and
against
Cuba is, in
Israel.
fact,
Who knows,
the dunging of the
maybe some
Cubana
of the
plane
protesters,
off
or even
the
many
waters
of the
Barbados,
protesters
where
outside
Cubans,
this building now.
Guyanese, and Koreans were killed. My friends,
Ladies and gentlemen,
Cuba has been a valuable
King
partner
Solomon,
stepping up for
who
us
reigned in our eternal
when it has
capital,
mattered
Jerusalem,
most,
3,000 years
by the
ago,
provision of
proclaimed-
nurses and doctors in pandemics,
He proclaimed something
and by the provision
that is
of
familiar
other
to all of
essential
you.
workers when the
said,
global community needed it,
"There is
and
nothing
when
new
people
under the
needed to
sun."
be liberated in southern Africa.
Well,
the
in an age
reality
of
is
space
that
travel,
we must have
quantum physics,
and
and
continue to
artificial
have
intelligence,
resolve
some would argue
in
that's
calling for
a
the
debatable
embargo
statement.
to be lifted. And we
But
will
one thing
condemn it year
is
after
undeniable.
year after year,
there is
because it
definitely
simply wrong.
nothing new at the United
As we
Nations.
say so, we pray that the people of Cuba, as they determine what damages they have found from Hurricane Helen, as well as we pray
Take
for
it
the
from
people
me.
of Florida, who
I
clearly
first
are going to
spoke from
spend the
this
next
podium
few days
as Israel's ambassador to
identifying
the
the
UN
damage as a result of a
1984.
hurricane that hit
That's
Category
exactly
4
40
when
years
it
ago.
reached Florida.
And in
This
my maiden
is the
speech
climate
here,
crisis that we speak
I think
about.
it's the same podium, by the way.
The people of Nigeria
My maiden
are still
speech here,
counting the bodies
I
with
spoke
respect to the floods
against
that
the
took place
proposal
there.
to expel Israel
We
from
have
this body.
hard work to do.
4 decades later,
In our own Caribbean region,
I find myself
Beryl
defending Israel
literally
against
decimated
that
the islands
same
of Carriacou
preposterous
and Union
proposal.
Island, and
And
indeed
who's leading the
would have
charge
affected
this time?
Grenada and St. Vincent more
Not
broadly,
Hamas,
Jamaica,
but
and
Abbas.
my own country's coastal infrastructure
Palestinian Authority
was
President
significantly
Mahmoud Abbas.
affected, with
This
our
is the man who
fishing industry,
claims he wants
90%
peace
of
with
it
Israel.
being decimated.
Yet he still
This season of
refuses to condemn the
superlatives with
horrific
its floods
massacre
and
of
droughts,
October
its
7th.
hurricanes and
He's
fires
still paying
will
hundreds
take
of
the
millions
lives
to
and
terrorists who
livelihoods of
murder
too many.
Israelis and
The
Americans.
climate crisis is
It's called
hitting
pay for
us
slay. The more you
almost
murder, the more you
weekly
get paid.
across the globe.
And
The
he still
deniers
wages
of the climate
unremitting
crisis,
diplomatic warfare
they too
against
need a
Israel's right
reset.
to exist
A reset
and
that
against
will
Israel's
admit
right
of
to
the
defend
absolute
itself. And
necessity
by the
of
way,
collective
they amount
action
to
by
the
the
same
global
thing.
community
Because if
to
you can't
save our
defend
way of
yourself, you
life
can't
and our
exist.
planet.
Not in our neighborhood.
Mr. President, at
and
the
maybe
start
not
of
in
this
yours.
week, the skies
Standing in
were
this
much
podium
darker.
40 years
I
ago,
truly believe so.
I told the
We are
sponsors
starting
of
to
that
see some
outrageous
glimmers of
resolution
light.
to expel Israel.
We leave New
Gentlemen,
York this week noting
check
that
your
the clouds
fanaticism
are
at the
lifted,
door.
conscious that the sun is
Today,
peeping out in certain
I
areas,
tell
not
President
all,
Abbas
but in
and
certain
all of you
critical areas,
who would shamefully support that
giving us
resolution,
a sense of
check
renewed
your
hope
fanaticism at the door.
that reset is in fact
The
not only
singling out of the
possible,
one and only
but
Jewish state
necessary in key
continues to be a
areas.
moral stain on the
Institutional
United
reform,
Nations. It has
reform
made
in
this
our
once respected
financial
institution
architecture,
contemptible
reform
in the
in
eyes of
how we
decent
view
people
development,
everywhere.
but above all else,
But for the
reform in
Palestinians,
how we see each other
this
and
UN
value
House
each
of
other.
Darkness,
This hope
home
springs
court.
from the Pact for the Future
they know that
and the
in
many
this swamp
declarations that we have
of
made here.
anti-Semitic bile,
The terms in which my
there's
fellow
an
leaders
automatic
spoke
majority
from this platform for the most
willing
part.
to demonize
The
the Jewish state
urgent
on
need to
anything.
recognize,
In this
reset,
anti-Israel,
reset,
flat Earth
reset,
society,
even if they
any
didn't
false
call
charge,
it by that name.
any outlandish
It is
allegation
as if we all truly
can muster a
understand
majority.
and accept the challenge of
In the
rising
last
to
decade,
solve the major
There
difficulties
have been more resolutions passed
are
against Israel
faced by the people of
in
the
this
world.
fall at the
And
UN
to
General
recognize
Assembly
that global moral
than against
strategic
the
leadership
entire world
requires of us
combined.
the commitment to redress
Actually,
the wrongs and
more
to
than
take
twice
care
as many.
of saving people
Since
and planet.
2014,
But
this
recognition
body
of the
condemned
need for the
Israel
reset,
174
while it is the
times.
first step in any
It
issue,
condemned all the other countries
what
in the
is
world
now also needed
73 times.
is eternal vigilance.
That's more than
as our
100
companion, so that
extra
as we take
condemnations
the steps to
for the Jewish
transform
state.
attitudes and institutions
What
and
hypocrisy! What a
We will not
double
succeed
standard!
overnight.
What a joke!
we will not succeed even in
So
the
the
next
UN's
decade.
hostility.
But if we don't do the reset to change the legacy of centuries of exploitation and domination, we will not be fit for purpose to meet the needs of our people in
So
the
all
third
the
decade
speeches
of the
you heard
21st
today,
century.
all the hostility
I can
directed
think,
at
therefore,
Israel
of no
this
better
year,
way to conclude than with a
not
song
about Gaza.
that I had cause to use
about Israel.
almost 30 years ago.
It's always
from my
been
own
about
country.
Israel. About
Song
Israel's
from
very
Edwin Yearwood
existence.
when I first stood on this podium
And I
almost
say
30
to you,
years ago, in
until Israel,
1995,
until the Jewish
as a
state
young minister
is
of
treated
youth,
like other nations,
and I quote,
until this
a voice
anti-Semitic
in my
swamp
head
is
keeps
drained,
talking to me.
the UN will be
It
viewed
tells
by
me the
fair-minded
road
people
is
everywhere
long.
as
It
nothing
tells
more
me
than a
we must be
contemptuous
strong.
farce.
Roll with the
Now,
pain
given
and
the
roll with the
anti-Semitism
strife.
at the UN,
For today is the
it
rest
should
of the
surprise
start
no
of your
one
life.
that the prosecutor at the
Mr. President, may the
ICC,
new
one of the
hope
UN's affiliated
fostered
organs,
here this week
is considering issuing arrest
signal the
warrants
start
against me
of a new deal for
and Israel's
people who
defense
hitherto
minister,
were not seen,
the
and even
democratically
with the
elected
existence
leader
of this body, whose
leaders
voice and presence
of the
were not
Democratic
felt.
State of Israel.
These
The
people
ICC
have been
prosecutors rushed to
recognized too
judgment.
often, and these
His refusal
countries
to treat
as mere
Israel
statistics
with its independent courts,
and not with the
the
human
way other
dignity
democracies are
that is
treated,
their birthright,
is hard to explain by
or the
anything
human
other
dignity
than
that is the
pure
conferred right
anti-Semitism.
from these United Nations.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Mr. President, I thank you.
the real war criminals are not in Israel. They're in Iran. They're in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in
On
Yemen.
behalf of the Assembly, I wish to
Those of
thank
you
the
who
Prime
stand with
Minister,
these war criminals,
Minister for National
those of
Security
you who
and the Public
stand with
Service,
evil
and Minister
against
for
good,
Finance,
with a curse
Economic
against the
Affairs,
blessing,
and Investment
those of you who do so
Barbados.
should be ashamed of yourselves.
The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency
But I have a
Karen
message
Tobgay,
for you.
Prime Minister of the Kingdom
Israel
of Bhutan.
will win this battle.
I request protocol
We'll win
to
this
escort
battle
His
because we
Excellency
don't
and
have a
invite
choice.
him to address the
After
Assembly.
generations in which our people were slaughtered, remorselessly butchered, and no one raised a finger in our defense, we now have a state. We now have a brave army, an army of incomparable courage, and we are defending
Mr.
ourselves.
President, Mr. Secretary General,
As the book of Samuel says in the Bible,
distinguished
Netzach
delegates,
Yisrael lo
I
yishaker.
bring to you
The eternity
warm
of
greetings
Israel will
from
not
His
falter.
Majesty the Druk Gyalpo. Excellencies, 53 years ago, on the
In the Jewish
21st of
people's
September
epic journey from antiquity,
1971,
in our odyssey through
a
the
small
tempests
Himalayan
and
kingdom
upheavals of modern
was
times,
admitted
that
to the
ancient
United
promise
Nations.
has always been kept.
On that day,
And it will
after
hold true
centuries of
for all
self-imposed
time.
isolation,
To borrow
Bhutan
a
became the
great poet's phrase,
128th member
Israel will
of the
not
United
go
Nations.
gently into that good night.
It was a
We will
defining
never-
moment for us.
we will never
it was a
need to
defining
rage
moment for us.
Against the
When a
dying of the
small,
light,
poor,
because
landlocked
the torch
country
of Israel
nestled
will
in the
forever
world's highest
shine
mountain,
bright.
joined the global community of nations. That
To the
same
people
year,
of Israel
the United Nations
and to the
created
soldiers of Israel,
the
I
least
say,
developed country
be strong
category
and
to
of good
provide
courage.
targeted support to
חזקו
the
ואמצו
world's
ואל
poorest
תיראו
nation.
מפניהם. כי אדוני אלוהיך
was
הוא
among the
ההולך
first
עמך,
to be admitted
לא
in that
ירפך ולא יעזבך.
Back
עם
then,
ישראל
our
חי, the
economy was
people of
primarily
Israel
agrarian,
live, now,
operating
tomorrow,
largely
forever.
on a barter
Thank you.
system. Our per capita GDP income stood at just 215.
On behalf of the Assembly,
Life expectancy was
I
barely
wish to thank the
40
Prime
years.
Minister of the State of Israel.
Infant mortality was tragically high at 142 deaths for every 1,000 live births. And our literacy rate was woefully low.
And invite him
We
to
had
address
only,
the
in fact,
Assembly.
less than 300 students in the few scattered schools that had been established to provide modern education.
Order, please.
I stand before you with the story of transformation.
Ladies and gentlemen,
and progress.
order.
Our per capita GDP has risen to more than 3,500 US dollars.
Order, please.
Life expectancy has increased to 70 years. Infant mortality has plummeted to 15 deaths per 1,000 live births. And our literacy rate, it has climbed to 71%, with youth literacy skyrocketing to 99%.
Mr.
I'm
President,
pleased to report to this august assembly that
ladies and
because
gentlemen,
of our all-round progress, last December,
I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight. I decided to come here to speak for my people, to speak for my country, to speak for the truth. And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again. Yet we face savage enemies who seek our annihilation, and we must defend ourselves against these savage murderers. Our enemies seek not only to destroy us, they seek to destroy our common civilization and return all of us to a dark age of tyranny and terror. When I spoke here last year, I said we faced the same timeless choice that Moses put before the people of Israel thousands of years ago. As we were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses told us that our actions will determine whether we bequeath to future generations a blessing or a curse. And that is the choice we face today. The curse of Iran's unremitting aggression, or the blessing of a historic reconciliation between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed that speech, the blessing I spoke of came into sharper focus. A normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel seemed closer than ever. But then came the curse of October 7th. Thousands of Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists from Gaza burst into Israel in pickup trucks, on motorcycles, and they committed unimaginable atrocities. They savagely murdered 1,200 people. They raped and mutilated women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. They burnt entire families alive, babies, children, parents, grandparents, in scenes reminiscent of the Nazi Holocaust. Hamas kidnapped 251 people from dozens of different countries, dragging them into the dungeons of Gaza. Israel has brought home 154 of these hostages, including 117 who returned alive. I want to assure you, we will not rest until the remaining hostages are brought home too. And some of their family members are here with us today. I ask you to stand up. With us is Eli Stevie, whose son Idan was abducted from the Nova Music Festival. That was his crime, a music festival. And these murderous monsters took him. Kobe Smirno, whose son Jonathan was murdered, and his corpse was taken into the dungeons, into the terror tunnels of Gaza, a corpse held hostage. Salim al-Atrash, whose brother Muhammad, a brave Arab-Israeli soldier, was murdered. His body too was taken to Gaza. And so was the body of Ifat Hyman's daughter in Bar, who was brutally murdered at that same music festival. With us is Sharon Sharabi, whose brother Yossi was murdered, and who prays for his older brother Eli, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And with us too is Izhar Lifsich from Kibbutz Nir Oz, a kibbutz that was wiped out by the terrorists. Thankfully, we achieved the release of his mother Yocheved, but his father Oded is still languishing in an underground terrorist hell of Hamas. I again promise you, we will return your loved ones home. We will not spare that effort until this holy mission is accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, the curse of October 7th began when Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza, but it didn't end there. Israel was soon forced to defend itself on 6 more war fronts organized by Iran. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked us from Lebanon. Since then, they fired over 8,000 rockets at our towns and cities, at our civilians, at our children. 2 weeks later, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched drones and missiles at Israel, the first of 250 such attacks, including one yesterday aimed at Tel Aviv. Iran's Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq have targeted Israel dozens of times over the past year as well. Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel. And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning. Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the 7-front war,